Greetings! Welcome to Nina's World. This podcast provides a short respite from the trials and tribulations of everyday life. We're going to step back in time to the 1950s and 60s. And now, our story. Nina defends Buddy. Because Nina had been in the nurse's office before going to her classroom on the first day of second grade, the children were already in their seats. Mrs. Wagner greeted her with such a friendly smile that Nina was no longer nervous. The teacher pointed Nina to her block of desks. Nina sat and then surveyed the classroom. 6 groups of 4 desks, a large American flag, and a story library corner. Buddy, Lois, and Charlie were seated in Nina's group. Nina was beginning to relax even more because Lois was her friend, and Charlie, had also been in her first grade classroom. Nina had met Buddy a week ago. She knew he'd be in the same classroom, but now in the same group? What a lucky coincidence. Mrs. Wagner told her students to talk quietly with each other, to introduce themselves, and tell a little about what they had done during the summer. Lois talked about going to the mountains to visit her grandparents. Charlie said he went to scout camp and earned a badge in knot tying. Nina wondered what was so special about that. Her shoes, knotted laces, were always there, and without even trying. She thought she should get a badge for learning how to untie knots. When it was Nina's turn, she said she had climbed a tree to the very top and had to be rescued by firemen. Lois knew that it was her neighbor, Mr. Finch, that had helped Nina down from the tree, but she kept it to herself. Buddy said his family moved because his dad's company had relocated, so this was his first day of his first year at Maple Elementary School. Charlie blurted out, "What happened to you? How come your hands are like that?" Buddy quickly moved his hands onto his lap. Like a Greek chorus, the girls scolded Charlie. "Charlie, that's not nice. It isn't polite to ask such questions." But Buddy recovered, remembering what his family had trained him to do, what he had practiced at home, and what he would have to do for the rest of his life. Taking a breath, Buddy placed his arms on the desktop and started his little speech. "It's okay. I was born this way, and so was my dad. My fingers didn't separate the way they should have. I can use a baseball bat, and I have a special mitt to catch balls. And not many kids at my other school could kick a ball as far as I could. Hey, Charlie, it stopped raining, so maybe we can play at recess." His speech was over, but he was honest, seemingly nonchalant, and had changed the subject. Nina piped up, I like to play. I like kickball and jump rope and hopscotch and wall ball and, oh, sorry, Buddy, can you play wall ball? Can you catch the ball without your special glove?" Buddy laughed, glad that the worst was over. "Sure, I use both my hands. Throwing the ball isn't easy. Charlie probably does that much better than me." Charlie squirmed, slightly embarrassed. Wasn't sure if he wanted to be drawn into a recess commitment. He might play with the new kid, and he might not. He would decide later. The blacktop had puddles from the morning's rain, but the sun was out now when the principal thought it was a good idea to let the children go outside for recess. but only on the blacktop. No playing in the field today. It was still too wet. She knew the fresh air and movement would be good for them. The buzzer rang for lunch for the first and third graders. What seemed like a million years later, give or take 10 minutes, the bell rang for the second and fifth graders. Into the multi-purpose room they filed, found their tables, and sat. Lots of kids brought their lunches in paper bags. A few had metal lunch boxes that were all the rage. Charlie grabbed Lois's new metal lunchbox to look at it, and then, instead of returning it, passed it down the row of children as they sat on the pull from the wall benches. Lois was indignant and hungry and wanted to see what her mother had packed for her lunch. As the lunchbox made its way back to her, Lois snapped, "Charlie, that wasn't nice. Don't ever touch my lunchbox again or I'll tell." Charlie just snickered and moved down to sit with some of the boys. He had been joking, and he didn't care who that crybaby Lois told. Table by table were called and went to the milk line, where Jim, the custodian, helped them to select a wax-coated carton of chilled milk. Others were going to buy a school lunch, picking up a tray, disappearing into the serving area, and reappearing at the other end with food cooked in the school cafeteria. Nina wanted to buy lunch too. It looked so good, but that would never happen. It was expensive, and it made so much more sense to have a sandwich and a few cookies. And she could start eating as soon as she was at her lunch table, instead of waiting in line. Nina sighed, took a bite of her bologna and cheese on white bread. Not bad, since she was hungry. All of the students had to be reminded of the cleanup routine. The lunch teacher blew her whistle. 3 short toots for quiet. Everyone seemed to end their conversations except for Charlie. He and the other boys at the end of the table were laughing as he mimed. Nina looked. What was Charlie doing? Nina gasped. Charlie had taken the wax paper from his sandwich and wrapped it around his fingers. He was pretending his hand was like Buddy's hand. He was pretending to scratch his head. Why didn't one of the lunch teachers notice him? Without thinking, Nina stood up, using her outdoor recess voice, and cried out, "You stop that, Charlie! You stop that right now!" And almost spitting because she was so angry. "And don't you ever make fun of my friend again. Buddy can't help it. He was born that way. How would you like it if it were you?" The room became as silent as midnight. The lunch teachers looked at each other, confused. What happened? Everyone now was looking at Nina, and Nina didn't like it. Nina didn't like it one bit. She felt a surge of tears that she refused to shed and sat down, concentrating on putting her leftover sandwich back in her brown bag. Buddy raised his head, sat straight, looked at his classmates at the end of the table, boys who didn't know him, only that his hands were different, and that his hands were the cause of the joke. The lunch teacher started to give instructions on cleanup, which door to exit for the blacktop-only recess. Mrs. Wagner was called from the teacher lunchroom, told about the outburst, and came to her students. As she walked towards them, she wondered what happened to her beautiful boys and girls in the short time she had not been with them. She wondered what she was in for, how she was going to manage the situation at the moment and moving forward. What kind of year was this going to be? Miss Garrison entered the multi-purpose room with one of the lunch teachers who had apparently gone to the office and told the principal all she knew, which wasn't much. Miss Garrison thanked the staff member and sent her to lunch. She walked to the table, knowing that another grade level of students was about to enter, and she had to remove these students from the room. Miss Garrison looked at Mrs. Wagner, her new teacher, and said, "Mrs. Wagner, I'm going to have your boys and girls come with me to the library for a chat. Maybe we can solve whatever the problem is. It's your lunchtime, but you're welcome to join us." Mrs. Wagner was certainly wanted to join the conversation and was glad for Miss Garrison's guidance. As the group entered the room, the librarian quickly removed her feet from a chair, stuffed her half-eaten sandwich into a drawer, and stood to greet the principal. Miss Garrison smiled. "It's okay, Mrs. Lutz, please. Finish your lunch. May we use your library for a conversation with these wonderful boys and girls from second grade?" Nina looked around, wondered who Miss Garrison was talking about. "Boys and girls, please take seats from these tables. Slide them gently over this way and be seated close to each other. Remember, we're in the library and we use our quiet voices. Mrs. Wagner, would you please sit next to me?" Mrs. Wagner took her seat too, looked at her students in their first day of school clothes, faces shiny and bright, some girls with bows, some boys with ties, full of potential. If only she could muster all her learning and help them to love learning too. Miss Garrison started quietly, gently, keeping her voice low, asking the students questions, listening to their answers, summing up the situation in a few sentences. She asked Charlie to think about what happened, asked if he would change what happened if he could, asked him if he had anything he wanted to say to Buddy, told him to think about it and that she would get back to him in a minute, turned to Nina and told her to think about the same questions that she had asked Charlie to think about. Charlie sat quietly, but a little red-faced. Nina did as well and began again to feel teary. Miss Garrison suggested Mrs. Wagner ask the questions and listen to the responses, and then to offer her own thoughts to the students. Yeah, time seemed to be moving backwards, but Mrs. Wagner was grateful for the opportunity. As the other children listened, Charlie and Nina, and then Buddy spoke. Charlie apologized and offered to shake hands, although inwardly he was reluctant to touch Buddy's hand. Nina bumbled along through an apology to Charlie as she tried to explain why she was upset. Buddy accepted it all, pondered the remarks, then stood up. He looked to his left and right. He looked at all his new classmates and asked, "Mrs. Wagner, is there any recess time left? I'd like to go play." The end. Thank you for visiting with us today. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to this podcast and share it with everyone you know. Return next week for another story from Nina's World. This story was written and read by Christine McKee, with gratitude to Dr. Ethel Ratkin of Bucks County Community College for editorial consultation and encouragement. Additional heartfelt support from family, friends, and members of my writing groups. Technical support was provided by Mr. Dan Tarrant of Personally Catholic. Sound engineering by Mr. Andrew Kimmock of AK Productions. May you embrace peace in your heart, in your home, and in your world.